Hello and welcome, it's Chris from Christopher Holt Training, and welcome to this week's tutorial where we're going to be talking about, is yoga or Pilates good for my back pain? It is touted as good exercise for the lower back and to, in some respects, help overcome lower back pain, but we're going to explore some pros and cons of yoga, of Pilates when it comes to back pain, because there's a little bit more to the story than just having a flexible spine and having a strong core, which I'm going to explain in the next couple of slides. But before we get into that, I just quickly want to mention, you can see up in the top right hand corner of the screen my social media: Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and YouTube. Please do come along to any of them and all of them. Like, follow and subscribe. If you are watching this video on YouTube, please do subscribe to the channel. Comment below anything that you found interesting, any questions that you might have or something that you've learnt. It'd be great to hear from you, gain some feedback. Alternatively, if you come to the link at the bottom of the screen, which will also be in the description, you can join my monthly newsletter, which is basically based around 3 topics. It's how to overcome lower back pain and improve spine health, build core strength and stability, and improve posture. It features a tutorial, so a video tutorial, which is a bit like this one, where I'll be giving you some underpinning knowledge, and then a practical workshop that you can follow along. 2 bits of recent content based on one of those topics, and an exercise or stretch of the month, which is based on the topic of the newsletter. So if that sounds like something that you might find useful, please do come along, click the link below, enter your name and email address, and you'll go straight on to receive the next one at the end of the month. So back to our topic, which is yoga or Pilates good for my back pain? Well, first of all, it depends. And it depends on a couple of things. Does it trigger pain? So this is the first fundamental thing. When I work with anyone with a bad back, I look for what's triggering the pain, because that's telling me a story about the back pain. So there are many different types of back pain, but 2 that I'm going to talk about today are, or the first one is flexion intolerance and extension intolerance. And then you've got extension and twisting intolerance. So I've combined the extension intolerance and the extension and twisting intolerance. They are, in a sense, 2 different things, but in some respects they can be the same thing. So what we're going to do is we're going to explore these different types of lower back pain, because one, they have different triggers. And if they have different triggers, they need to be managed in a different way. And yoga and Pilates, if you aren't, in a sense, coached in the correct way, or you haven't assessed your lower back so you can coach yourself in the correct way, you might be making your back pain worse rather than better, if that makes sense. So what we'll do is, if we click onto the next slide, we will get stuck into a little bit more detail about these different types of lower back pain. One of them is how we can or what is the cause, what is triggering it, and then how can we then go about better managing that lower back pain. A flexion intolerant spine is one that can't cope with being in a flexed position. So if you've had history of disc bulge or disc herniation, being in a flexed spine position is something that you want to try and most definitely reduce and, if possible, avoid. Because what's happening is the repeated flexion of the spine weakens tissues of the disc. So what's basically happening, if we go to this end picture here, we've got this gel-like fluid of the disc. We've then got the fibrous wall that goes around the outside of it. Now, when we go into in the flexed position, so it could be seated for a prolonged period of time, like this picture here, or it could be a flexed spine pose like this one here. What's happening is this gel-like fluid is getting pushed towards the back of the disc. If we keep doing it for a long period of time or a repeated number of times, it will start to migrate through that fibrous wall, and then eventually it will either press on the end of that wall and bulge, hence a bulging disc, and then compress on the nerve and cause pain, or it will press through that wall and then cause a herniated disc and then compress on the nerve and cause pain. So what we want to be doing, if you have history of disc bulge or disc herniation, avoid those postures and positions. If any of these postures and positions are creating pain or triggering pain, again, you want to then avoid them. What we can then start to do is, once we are out of those postures, we can start using postures which are more advantageous. Because it's not about stopping doing yoga or Pilates, it's knowing how to use yoga and Pilates to your anatomy's best ability. So what that basically means is a lot of people are, in a sense, told to do yoga and Pilates because they have a stiff lower back, or they have back pain, and it will cure that, or it will help overcome that. But what they don't necessarily understand is that if you've got a flexion intolerant spine, then going into these flexed positions isn't going to help your lower back pain. And it's the same when we come on to extension, because we have, again, postures like this where we extend the spine. Now, what's happening here is this is a combination of disc and facet joint. Now, facet joints are these little connections here between the vertebrae. Now, what can happen here is they could become inflamed, or they could become fractured, and that can then cause pain. So what we again want to be avoiding if you have an extension intolerant spine is these extension postures. Now, what you might find is that when you go into these postures, you get pain right at the base of your lower back. Now, that's a sign, or that's a signpost of it possibly being disc or facet joint. It's not to say that it is, because you would need to do further assessment on that back, but it will certainly point me in the direction of investigating that line of inquiry a little bit more. So the first thing for you to do is, first of all, understand your lower back pain. So when is it triggered? When does it feel worse? What's happening on the day before it feels worse? So you're starting to understand what's happening to your lower back pain. If you find that in flexed positions, or when you've been sitting for a long period of time, or when you've been gardening for a long period of time, that's a good indicator that if that's causing pain, this is a position to start to avoid. So this flexed position. So any poses that go into that flexed position are useful to either reduce or certainly avoid. It's exactly the same with the extension. First of all, think about, when is my pain being triggered? Is it being triggered in these extension poses or positions? If it is, then it's a good chance that you're aggravating these facet joints and possibly the discs. So what we then need to be able to do is either eliminate or avoid, or certainly reduce these postures and positions. What this will then do, this will get you into what would be described as like a pain-free movement. What starts happening then is your back starts to build a degree of resilience against that. And as that builds greater and greater, you give yourself more margin for error, and then in the future you could then go back into those postures and positions, because you've built up that much of a bank account that you can then start dipping into it. Because at the moment, if you go into that position and it's either causing pain immediately or possibly the day after, you don't have much in that bank account, and it's constantly wavering between going in the red and staying in the black, if that makes sense. So what we've got to do is we've got to build up that bank account enough that when we go into those postures and positions, it doesn't trigger our pain. That is then when we can start saying we have overcome lower back pain. So is yoga or Pilates good for my lower back pain? It can be, and it cannot be. What we've got to do is we've got to understand our back pain. We've got to understand our anatomy, and then we've got to use yoga and Pilates accordingly. Yoga and Pilates aren't going to rescue you from your lower back pain. If you understand your anatomy and use yoga and Pilates accordingly, then yes, it can. So hopefully this has given you a better idea of yoga, Pilates and back pain, and how you put the three together, or two together. And hopefully it's given you a better understanding of your anatomy, and hopefully it's given you a better understanding of your back pain. So what you can now do is go into yoga, go into Pilates with a little bit more understanding and a little bit more expertise into the poses and positions that are most beneficial for you. So many thanks for watching. My name is Chris. I will speak to you in next week's tutorial.